February 5th, 1864, Major General William T. Sherman's Union Army marches into Jackson, Mississippi en route to Meridian. February 5th, 1864, William T. Sherman's Union Army. It's after he's already conquered Savannah. He's already marched through South Carolina. Motherfucking William Tecumseh Sherman's a goddamn badass. 6 good reasons why the American Revolution was awesome. The rule of law was upheld. 3 branches of government, Bill of Rights, Constitution, federalism, elections. We got all these things. Democratic Republic, 3 branches of government, Constitution, federalism, Bill of Rights, elections, rule of law. And all these are worthy of revolution today if anybody ever threatened our Constitution or Bill of Rights or 3 branches of government or federalism or our election system. So let's read a little passage out of Lincoln Reconsidered by David Donald. Page 44. It is only by discounting these belated recollections and garbled introspections that one can hope to arrive at a true picture of Mary Todd Lincoln. Mary Todd Lincoln very much seems like a Yoko Ono kind of figure to me. Sort of takes Abraham Lincoln away from the people and America and his duty. She buys a bunch of dresses and almost goes bankrupt with the fund of the presidency. So I got I don't know if that's the full picture of Mary Todd Lincoln, but that's my understanding of Mary Todd. Herndon assiduously collected backstairs gossip about Mrs. Lincoln and spread it as truth. He did not consciously misinterpret facts, for he was really determined to do justice for Mary Todd Lincoln, but he was eager to accept stories that fitted in with his preconceived ideas. Any thinking person will realize how difficult it is to remember correctly the back fence gossip of 20 to 40 years earlier, even assuming that the gossip was ever correct in the first place. By following strictly contemporary accounts, one gets a different view of Mrs. Lincoln. When Miss Mary Todd came to Springfield in 1839 to make her home with her sister, Mrs. Ninian W. Edwards, she came as a belle. As an interesting and attractive young woman destined to be the center of social life and gaiety. The Todds were a proud and distinguished family in Kentucky, numbering 2 governors, a couple of cabinet members, and a score of less distinguished officials as close relatives. It was the Todds, together with the Crittendens and the Clays, who set the social tone for Lexington. Yet the Todd name carried with it a less desirable heritage too, a sort of mental taint, a tendency towards abnormally intense personalities, ill adapted to severe crises or harsh shocks. The medical record shows that Mary Todd's own brother became a mental case, but all this was in the future, for Miss Todd was a brilliant addition to Springfield society in the 1830s. Mary Todd had been well educated at Madame's Mentels, both in English fundamentals and in French, which she read fluently. French? She could write a gracious and well-expressed letter. She could dance and hold sprightly conversations with men. She was a born coquette, a flirt. When life with her stepmother in Kentucky became unendurable, it was natural that she should visit her Springfield sister, for here she might find an attractive husband and home. Women are always at a premium in a frontier society, and it is not surprising that the Edwards house in the winters of 1839 and 1840 was a center of gaiety. There were balls and sleigh rides and excursions and parties. 6 young men danced in attendance upon the new queen. James C. Conkling, Joshua Speed, Stephen A. Douglas, and a gawky young lawyer called Abraham Lincoln. Mary Todd was excited and delighted by such attentions. In a letter of the time, a friend described her as the very creature of excitement who never enjoyed herself more than when in society and surrounded by a company of merry friends. Mary, as her niece remembered her, although not strictly beautiful, was more than pretty. She had a broad white forehead, eyebrows sharply but delicately marked, A straight nose, short upper lip, and an expressive mouth curling into an adorable, slow-coming smile that brought dimples into her cheeks and glinted in her long-lashed blue eyes. Observers noted her plump, round figure, her lovely complexion, her soft brown hair. One of the clearest pictures of Mary Todd at this time comes from Herndon himself, of a short build, chunky, compact, and of about the average height, and weighed about 130 pounds, haughtily dignified, moved easily, a fine conversationalist, witty and sometimes terribly sarcastic, intelligent, quick, intuitive. Others also noted Mrs. Todd's sharp tongue. Even while admitting her charms, she could be gracious, but she could also flash out with an ungovernable temper, possibly a reflection of her lack of early home training. She was ambitious and intelligently so. She came to find a husband, and she intended to make a good choice. Half laughingly, Mary said that she was going to marry the man who would become president of the United States. It was not hard to understand why she rejected one widower, referring to her motherless children as two sweet little objections. The extent of Stephen A. Douglas's attentions had probably been exaggerated, but he was very often in the Edwards parlor. But it was Abraham Lincoln with whom she finally fell in love. It must have been an amusing courtship for an outsider, awkward and rough and a little embarrassed in the presence of ladies. Abraham Lincoln would sit and listen, fascinated by Mary Todd's prattle, but he could not carry on the conversation himself. Friends advised Mary against the match, pointing out Lincoln's poor prospects and his even poorer present. Exactly what happened during those winter months of 1840 to 1841 is not clear, but apparently there was an engagement of some sort, or at least an understanding. The commonly accepted story, started by Herndon and spread by fiction writers, is that the two were to be married. To quote Herndon's version, the time fixed for the marriage was the first day in January 1841. Careful preparations for the happy occasion were made at the Edwards mansion. The house underwent the customary renovation. The supper was prepared and the guests invited. The latter assembled on the evening in question and awaited in expectant pleasure the interesting ceremony of marriage. The bride, bedecked in veil and silken gown and nervously toying with the flowers in her hair, sat in the adjoining room. Nothing was lacking but the groom. Hours passed and Lincoln failed to appear. The wedding plans were abandoned and the guests quietly departed. This is not the place to examine this wedding story in detail. It's enough to realize that the whole episode was created from self-contradictory reminiscences given years after the event, that no contemporary letter by Mary Todd, Lincoln, or their friends mentions a projected marriage for the couple, that Lincoln did not take out a marriage license in 1840, and that Springfield gossips did not spread the tale until after Lincoln's death. But if there was no deserted bride, no waiting guest, or garlanded house, there was certainly a major emotional crisis about this time. Lincoln referred to the day as that fatal 1st of January 41, and he considered himself the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, he wrote disconsolately, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth. A friend remarked that he is reduced and emaciated in appearance and seems scarcely to possess strength enough to speak above a whisper, and laughingly called Lincoln a poor, hapless, simple swain who loved most true but was not loved again. Mary Todd, though she carried on the round of parties and entertainment, was none too happy either. Lincoln, she wrote to a bosom companion, deems me unworthy of notice, as I have not met him in the gay world for months. Others were as seldom gladdened by his presence as my humble self, yet I would that he would once more resume his station in society, that Richard should be himself again. Much happiness would it afford me. The best reconstruction that can now be made of the whole tangle is as follows. About the 1st of January, 1841, Abraham Lincoln, realizing his poverty and doubting his ability to make a sensitive and cultured woman happy, asked to be released from his engagement. Mary Todd consented, though letting it be known that she would consider the question still open. Thus the crisis passed. It was not until nearly 2 years later that their marriage actually took place. During that time, Abraham Lincoln was comforted by the knowledge that the marriage of his friend Joshua Speed was successful. He was also rising to a more secure financial position as one of the leading lawyers in Springfield. The estranged couple was brought together through the agency of Mrs. Simeon Francis, a common friend, and the engagement was renewed. There was no public announcement, for Mary Todd said that the world, woman and man, were uncertain and slippery, and that it was best to keep the secret courtship from all eyes and ears. Some months later, on November 4th, 1842, Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd were married. The Lincolns at first stayed at the Global Tavern, where they got room and board for $4 a week. It was here that their first son, Robert Todd, was born. In 1846, the second child, Edward Baker, came, and the same year Lincoln was elected to Congress for a part of his term. The Lincoln family lived in Washington with him, rooming at Mrs. Spriggs, but some of the time Mrs. Lincoln stayed at her father's in Kentucky. The letters between husband and wife during this period revealed the tender affection that united the couple and their deep devotion to their children. Writing from Washington in 1848, Lincoln found himself loathsome for his wife in Kentucky to occupy his time. He went shopping for plaid stockings to fit Eddie's dear little feet. All the house, he wrote, Mary, or rather all with whom you were on decided good terms, send their love to you. The others say nothing. He was concerned with his Molly's health. Are you entirely free from headache? He asked. That is good. I am afraid you will get so well and fat and young as to be wanting to marry again. She replied in kind, telling the family news how little Eddie had recovered from a spell of sickness and how the children had adopted a homeless kitten. She concluded, Do not fear the children have forgotten you. I was only jesting. Even eyes brighten at the mention of your name. Other letters at this period tell of a husband's anxiety to see his wife, provided she would be a good girl in all things when she came east, and of his worry about an accumulation of debts. Later, Abraham Lincoln wrote impatiently that he had expected to see you all sooner, and closed with a kiss and love the dear rascals. These were the sort of letters that an understanding and adjusted couple would write. When the term in Congress was over, Lincoln returned to Springfield to the practice of law and the pursuit of politics. Mary was a help to her husband. She had influential family connections. She could guard against social blunders. She read books for Lincoln. She understood politics and was a good judge of characters. She carried on the church responsibilities for the parish. She could entertain and charm visiting politicians. In short, Mary Todd was precisely the wife that Abraham Lincoln needed. All right, David Donald. David Donald's got two first names. Mary Todd's got two first names. Is that a coincidence? Probably.